people in other parts of the world are hearing. What if you could experience a stranger's neural activity, see what they see, know what they know? Not just vision and sound, but taste, touch, and smell. Would that ability bring us together? In 1927, the telephone let us speak to each other across continents. 70 years later, virtually every computer in the United States could access every other computer through the Internet. What if, in this next century, we develop the technology to connect our minds? Some scientists believe this may happen. Would anyone be lonely ever again?
Yes, of course they'll be lonely. Loneliness and being human go hand in hand. Walk down any city street and what do you see? Crowds of lonely people.
But it doesn't have to be like that. Humankind could be a true community, share our thoughts, our feelings.
I don't want anyone inside my head picking over the minutiae of my brain like it was some kind of cerebral garage sale. And I certainly don't care what my local grocer thinks about the price of pickles. It's all so invasive.
Invasive to walk up to a stranger and tell them that you're sorry that their cat died?
But my cat dying is my cat dying. It's not a shared event.
Oh, perhaps you're just afraid to let people know what you think.
Oh, come on. Publishing my opinions was my bread and butter.
Oh, well then you don't mind letting Robin know that you're wondering what she's doing after the show?
So not so dead after all, huh?
Are there any normal people in your world?
I'm normal.
What's my shoe size?
8.5, extra wide.
That's not normal. That's cyborgish. That's not human.
Are you saying, Hux, that once a person gets a single electrode implanted in their brain, they're no longer human? Dr. Kennedy referred to Eric as a cyborg. Does that mean he's not human anymore?
No, of course he's human.
Well, let's see what Ramez Nam, a computer specialist from Seattle, has to say about this.
In science fiction, the idea of a cyborg is someone that has technology implanted inside their body, someone who is part human and part machine. And we're getting there. As long as we've existed as humanity, we've always looked for ways to make ourselves smarter, make ourselves live longer. That's why we invented writing. That's why we picked up sticks. That's why we invented the use of fire. We're always looking for these ways to improve our lives and improve our control over who we are and our environment. That's what it means to be human.
Well, call me old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned.
But I still say what it means to be human is being human, not part can opener.
Luddite.
You say Luddite like it's a bad thing.
Well, there is certainly no shortage of strong opinions on this subject. The author Bill McKibben happens to side with you, Mr. Huxley.
And the kind of Jetsons fantasies about the world, you know, where you just eat a little pill and that takes care of all your food, or the sort of fantasies where you live in a pod by yourself and have virtual relationships and experience the world through your neural network while you're, sitting in a glass jar in some lab or whatever the hell it is that people have. Those are just insane. They're the product of a kind of thinking that really is almost damaged in its dislike for other people, its dislike for human physicality, and in its almost stunning fear of dying.
Wow. Like it or not, though, the brain-computer interface is coming along pretty quickly.
And once you figure out how to get a single electrode to accurately record brain signals, it's not too hard to get thousands to work. It's mostly a matter of miniaturization.
Yeah, all right. But this is all about getting information out. If this worldwide mind is going to work, you're going to have to get information in. How are you going to do that?
Actually, that technology has been around for quite some time. There are, in fact, tens of thousands of people around the world with computers implanted in their brains.
I would say that I'm an early version of a cyborg, because I have a device in my head that computationally controls a part of my nervous system.
Michael was always enamored of the concept of the cyborg. He was born in December of 1964. I remember thinking when we would go in and get ready to go to sleep that, you have to be quiet, you don't want to wake the baby. And, of course, he never woke up. And I used to think, wow, what a good little baby. Of course, I never, ever thought it had to do with his hearing.
I first got hearing aids when I was 3.5 years old. I felt very consciously different from everyone around me.
Missing conversations, that feeling of being left out. You don't know the newest music that the kids are listening to.
I always had to sit in the front row, close to the teacher. I couldn't hear things that were being shouted to me when I was in Little League. So I definitely struggled with being included when I was a young child. I was in Tahoe for a business trip. I was waiting for my car to be brought to me at a rent-a-car outlet. I suddenly thought that the batteries in my left hearing aid were dying. It was very sudden, so I thought, that's odd.
I came home, there was a phone message for me, and it was a woman who didn't identify herself and said, your son Michael is here, would you please call this number when you get home?
So I asked the nurse to call my mother, and she translated. She would tell me what my mom was saying.
She said, your son is here, and he's had a problem, but he wants to talk with you.
Then I would talk to the phone to tell her what was going on.
And then I heard Mike's voice, and he said, Mom, just listen to me because I won't be able to hear you. And he started to tell me that his hearing had just disappeared. And then the nurse got on, and she said, is there anything else I can tell your son? And I said, just tell him I love him. And, sorry. And I'll be in touch with him as soon as we possibly can.
Of course, I couldn't go through with the meetings. I drove my car back to the car rental station. The place was closed. There was a sign that said, park your car, deposit your keys, and call for a courtesy cab to the airport. So I walked over to the telephone and stared at it. And I felt a little bit like, like Snoopy, looking at these signs saying, no dogs allowed. It was just, you can't use this. But I had just a tiny little bit of hearing left in the ear. The ear was not yet completely dead. So I was hoping that I could hear the difference between a no and a yes. So I picked up the phone, I called the telephone number, and I said, I need a cab to the airport.
No, I'm sorry. I'm deaf and I can't hear you.
If you can send it, just say yes or no. And I heard it would sound like a s sound. So I hung up, hoping that that sound was part of the word yes. And then I sat there and I waited. And I waited. And about 5 minutes later, a cab came up. Being suddenly deaf is a very challenging experience. Not only could I not use the telephone, I could not understand people unless I was talking with them one-on-one, face-to-face.
To lose one's hearing as an adult is a profound trauma because we as human beings are such social creatures. Losing the mode of communication you've always known can leave a person feeling terribly isolated.
The door would knock, I would not hear it. When I was driving, I couldn't hear car horns or anything going on around me. I remember that in the supermarket, I forgot to take my change. And the bagger was calling after me, saying, hey, you forgot your change. And I didn't hear him. He actually ran after me, tapped my shoulder in the parking lot, and I turned around and I said, oh. So it was that inability to be alerted, to hear what was going on around me.
When Mike first arrived at the foundation for his appointment, he was very frustrated. He'd obviously gone through an emotional event, having had a hearing loss his whole life, but having suddenly lost more of that hearing in a sudden instant.
A cochlear implant is a device that enables totally deaf people to hear. It works not by amplifying sound like a hearing aid, but by stimulating the inner ear with electrical impulses. It's surgically implanted. The surgeon inserts a string of electrodes into the inner ear. Those electrodes are controlled by a computer that's embedded in the skull, and the user wears a device on the outside of the ear that looks like a hearing aid.
Cochlear implants are becoming more common, and they have great benefits in that they can broaden a deaf person's access to educational opportunities, professional opportunities, and social opportunities.
I was seeing it through the lens of having been a science fiction reading geek my whole life. I was very aware of the fact that this was a cyborg technology, that I was going to have an actual computer installed in my head. And so I found it a very spooky experience to realize that the kind of things I've been reading about in science fiction was now actually going to happen to me.
The deaf community is concerned, however, that people are regarding cochlear implants as a way to make people not deaf. The deaf community regards deafness as a culture, and even if you're a member of a minority culture, a proposal to cure you of your cultural affiliation is as offensive as it might be to say, you know, I have a cure for being black or gay or female.
Cochlear implant surgery is actually fairly simple as surgeries go. Mine lasted about an hour and a quarter. It's outpatient surgery. I was in the hospital at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was out by 2 o'clock that day. When I left the hospital right after the surgery, my hearing was not any different than it was before. You have to wait a couple of weeks for the incision to heal before you get the external device which drives the implant. So I was deaf before the surgery. I was just as deaf after the surgery. My implant was activated about 3.5 weeks after my surgery. It's quite an extraordinary experience to wake up in the morning knowing that you're going to be hearing by the end of the day. It's like coming up to a wall and knowing that you're going to climb it, but you don't know what's on the other side.
We typically tell people that it will sound a little mechanical, that it might sound robotic, and that most voices and sound information will not exactly sound like they remember it.
The very first sounds I actually heard when the implant was turned on was the sound of my own voice.
When we turned the device on, I remember him with a little bit of a puzzled look on his face, you know, trying to kind of make sense of the information.
It's very difficult to explain to someone what it's like to learn to hear all over again. It was really a shock to me. I was expecting it to sound strange. I was expecting it to sound weird. I was not prepared for the fact that voices would sound like gibberish. I could tell that I was hearing voices, but I couldn't tell the difference between anybody's voices.
It took him quite a while, it took his brain a while to understand these new signals.
It began to sink into me that it was going to take months for me to learn how to use this device. When I got home after my implant was turned on, I could hear environmental sounds very sharply, very clearly. Like I could hear a clock ticking 20 feet away. But at the same time, when I tried to call somebody or listen to the radio, it sounded like gibberish. But the little sounds were so clear. I was sitting on my couch, and I was hearing this tinkling sound in the distance. And I was wondering, what is that? Then I opened my door, and I discovered that I was hearing the wind chimes outside my door through the door.
While he couldn't tell a male voice from a female voice at activation, by the next day, men sounded like men, and women, I think he described as sounding like they were sucking on a helium balloon.
There was an exhilaration about it. It was so exciting to be rediscovering all these things in completely new ways. I'm very aware that my body is programmable, that a part of my body is actually controlled by a computer. That's an extraordinary change in the way I see my own body, the way I perceive the world around me.
Oh, I think an implant definitely changes somebody's personality. I think it makes them a more confident individual. It allows them to relax a little bit. It allows them to overhear conversation a little bit better. It allows them to not work so hard at focusing on individuals' faces for listening, for lip reading.
I sometimes ask what people thought my cochlear implant was, and one person said, well, I thought it was a Secret Service thing, but you don't look Secret Service. In just the last year or two,